Sometimes things cannot be fixed with flying skills. These are events that pilots have never trained for and would never expect. Events in which pilots face the impossible and where the inevitable takes over. As airline pilots, we like to believe that we can handle just about anything. We have gone through years of training and rigorous testing. So what would be a pilot's worst nightmare? Well, I'll tell you. Facing a hopeless situation from which recovery is impossible. The following accidents will demonstrate just this. The investigation of this accident indicated the mechanic who worked on the elevator cables had never worked on this type of aircraft before. The tension on the control cables had been set incorrectly, resulting in insufficient elevator travel. The post-adjustment control checks were also skipped by the maintenance supervisor. This prevented the pilots from having enough elevator authority to control the aircraft. This accident occurred in Dallas, Texas, as a result of a modified maintenance procedure adopted by not just this airline, but other airlines that operated the same type of aircraft in order to save time. Although this procedure was not approved by the manufacturer, the FAA allowed these operators to modify their procedures. The removal and reattachment of each engine was typically a two-step process. First removing the engine, then removing the pylon. However, forklifts were used instead to move the entire assembly in one piece. A shift change occurred when only one of the two attachments had been disconnected. The forklift lost hydraulic pressure which hadn't been noticed, leading to a stress fracture because of the uneven weight distribution. This was not detected. This resulted in the stress fracture growing over time, leading to eventual catastrophe. Unbeknownst to the crew, the loss of hydraulic pressure on the left wing after the loss of the left engine led to the retraction of the leading edge slats on that side, increasing the stall speed on that side by 20 knots. The crew had no way of knowing this, and it sealed their fates. Facing annihilation caused by people on the ground from which pilot intervention will make no difference is by far a pilot's worst fear. In this accident, this aircraft had previously suffered a tail strike. Poor maintenance was performed because only a single row of rivets was provided instead of a double row as required per Boeing repair instructions. As a result, 7 years after the repair had been done, the repair separated in flight, severing all hydraulic lines and making controlled flight impossible. Incredibly, the crew had managed to keep the airplane flying for over a half hour, with throttle control only before it crashed. In this accident, due to poor maintenance, a jack screw nut holding the elevators in place had separated completely from the jack screw, allowing the elevators to move fully deflected without pilot input or pilot control. This rendered the aircraft completely unairworthy and unflyable. The pilots were awarded posthumously for their gallant efforts in trying to save the aircraft in spite of the hopeless situation. In this accident, the aircraft departed at night and maintenance had not removed the tape from the static ports, rendering the data from them unreliable. The aircraft crashed into the sea. In this accident, the investigation concluded that improperly secured cargo broke free during the takeoff and rolled to the back of the cargo hold, crashing through the rear pressure bulkhead and disabling the rear flight control system. Straps instead of chains were used. In this accident, the improper securing of cargo had allowed it to shift rearward so far back that the aircraft was rendered unflyable. Flying skill did not matter. In this accident, a piece of debris from a previous aircraft had been run over by the Concorde, had struck the underside of the wing, leading to a fire, the loss of 2 engines, and an inability of the crew to maintain flight. In this accident, it was determined that excessively hot hydraulic fluid was making the aircraft rudder move in a direction opposite from the direction that the pilots had commanded. Pilots would never train nor expect controls to behave in a direction contrary from a direction that they had trained in before. The very low altitude afforded very little margin for error. The pilots made no mistakes and could never have been expected to attempt to learn how to fly an aircraft with a control system operating contrary to what they had trained in the past. The rudder deflection, opposite from the direction the pilots had expected, led to a full stall from which they were unable to recover. As pilots, we always want to have a chance to affect the outcome. We don't want to have our hands tied. The probable cause of this accident was the explosion of the center wing fuel tank, resulting from the ignition of the flammable fuel-air mixture in the tank. In this accident, the flight crew experienced the complete loss of the vertical stabilizer because, according to investigators, the co-pilot utilized excessive rudder control inputs after encountering wake turbulence. Boeing aircraft limit rudder travel as an aircraft accelerates. Airbus aircraft limit rudder travel as well as the aircraft accelerates. However, it was discovered that a combination of overly aggressive pilot rudder inputs and less rudder force for full deflection caused the tail to break off. During this aircraft's rotation on takeoff, a control rod to the right elevator control tab detached because the bolt holding them together came undone. This caused the aircraft to pitch up aggressively on its own. Because one half of the elevator had been disconnected from the pilot's control, they crashed soon after. What would be one way of mitigating and reducing most of these accidents? Better maintenance. While the investigation into this recent accident will take years to complete, no aircraft can be expected to maintain sustained flight with the loss of thrust of two motors.